Good morning. So, uh, welcome to our webinar on mergers and acquisitions. On today's webinar, you have myself, Mark Churley from App Technology, and we also have Ben Cook from Management Studio. Today, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about some of the challenges IT infrastructure teams face during M&A activities. One of the challenges that we find is that maturity across the estates that are being pulled together can vary wildly. You can have extremely tightly governed estates running with tools like SCCM to some sprawling, virtually unmanaged estates with loads of shadow IT. And actually, often you'll find a variation of the two. So, well managed estates, but with some shadow IT hiding underneath the covers. Pulling data together when you're trying to run these activities manually can often leave visibility gaps, create blind spots, and you can't assess risks, costs, or integration efforts for the things you can't see. I've found in the past that there are often bloated application lists that get provided out, but they don't always tell you the context underneath it, what's actually being used, who's using it, and how critical it is. And if it's just coming out of a tool like SCCM, often there's a massive version sprawl within there, whether it's because multiple versions are actually being used or just because of the way that the tools report things. So hundreds of lines that all effectively relate back to the same piece of software. Beyond that, often, and this is quite hard to pull together, the people context can be missing. And what we find is that when you're planning ahead for these activities, but you don't understand the user data, departments, locations, offices, it's really hard to put the analysis into real world business decisions. With time pressures, so often, again, in my experience, M&A activities normally have pretty tight deadlines or very structured deadlines to meet. If you don't get the data right, you're driving with manual or inconsistent data, it can really keep pace with those time pressures. So, where can we help? Well, Management Studio as a tool is designed to bring data together. So, raw data from tools like SCCM and Intune, information from tool sets like Active Directory or potentially HR systems or other systems in the estate. It pulls that data together, combines it, links it, and you end up with actionable knowledge that you can use for managing your M&A activities. So effectively, you end up with that cliched single pane of glass for driving the M&A. So we've kind of touched on this already, but on the application side, how can things be improved? So with Management Studio, you can get full visibility of the application estate to start making decisions on. And you can do this based on evidence rather than guesswork. You can see where there are risks in the estate. Is anyone using Silverlight? Are there pockets of Office 2013 out there? You can start understanding where there might be overlaps. So, where are there applications on both sides of the estate where you can start looking at strategic shared functionality, as well as starting to look at where there's functionality similarities. So, for example, is there a PDF strategy across that can be merged across both sides of the estate? So you can start diving in, you can get the applications under control, and then start making those sensible strategic decisions. The next line on the slide, reducing license spend, is a really obvious output from this. So once you've got that application estate understood, you can start seeing where there's duplicate, unused, or overlapping licenses. And this is often one of the quickest wins within M&A activities where we see you can start demonstrating material savings from this. When you get that application estate under control, you can then start simplifying your day-to-day support, more consistent builds, less applications under management. And when you get those applications under management down, it doesn't just save on the support cost, but it also then helps with your security profile. Less applications to manage, increases patch compliance, easier to keep CE plus compliant and things like that. So again, it sort of drives the activity today, but then it helps you shape that path for managing in the future. And then you can start planning with confidence. So with accurate granular data, you can start sizing and sequencing the M&A projects rather than finding out in months to come that you've missed a whole suite of applications because it came from an unaudited, unknown part of the estate. So we've talked about applications and we've touched on people and context, but for us, what we find is getting that people context is absolutely critical. It allows you to move away from beige lists of applications and machines and truly understand the estate. So if there are good subnet maps to help you understand locations, there's good HR data, well-maintained Active Directories or other HR systems out there, we can pull that data together and start providing those machines and applications back in real human terms. So rather than looking at machine X is running Y applications, you're able to start going, well, the finance office in Manchester are running these suites of applications. So you're really starting to understand that estate and starting to be able to plan how you would want to handle the merger. But the data often isn't either perfect or it's not all going to be there. So again, within the tool, what we can look at is using surveys to help fill those gaps, validate what's been discovered, plug the gaps, or find out and enrich data. So we might be able to see what applications are there, what applications are used, but you might want to find something else out. What are the most critical applications for a user base? And that's where the surveys can really start to provide additional benefits. You're then able to start looking at understanding the hardware output that comes out, and again with that real world context. So we can then start helping you spot real practical challenges like where you've got an aging kit problem, where you've got machines that maybe aren't going to be compliant with the latest OSs, or actually potentially more significantly nowadays, where you might have machines that aren't going to be compatible with AI platforms that you're looking at, where AIs are starting to need much more specific hardware capabilities to be able to work. So again, pulling that data together and starting to be able to plan ahead. So we've talked about planning with context. We've talked about pulling data together into personas, into departments, into locations. It's really down to that environment to really understand what is important. We've worked with organizations where we had to identify teams that were working on projects because that was something that was important in terms of making sure that we handled them at the right time. So whatever information is out there, you can then start looking at those devices and those users with that context. What we would typically do at that point is look at deployment units with the tool, which allows us to start doing readiness tracking. So once you've decided how you want to structure your migration into deployment units, we can then start seeing when they go green, when their applications are ready, when their devices are ready. And you can also then start putting other dependencies into it. So for example, in the fictional finance Manchester office we talked about before, if we needed to get a piece of networking in place for that department to be able to be touched, that could be a dependency. We could have the machines ready, we could have the applications ready, but only once that dependency was ticked as being passed does that location become green and ready to action. So it goes from being a planning tool to being a management tool for the M&A activities. And one of the final pieces, which again is, I think, often critical in terms of managing this, is dashboards and reporting. So with all of that information together, it's incredibly straightforward to pull together meaningful dashboards, whether they're for live tracking or for CIO reporting. And you can see things like here where typically we say we can rationalize applications down from where they start to about 70% of that size. So we can typically drop 70% out. You can start demonstrating those license savings, reporting on that compatibility, looking at versions of OSs, agent health, and all of that important user context that we've seen in the estate. So this is what you can get out of the tooling. What I'll now do is I'll hand over to Ben, and Ben can start showing you what this really looks like in practice. So I'm just going to make Ben the host, and I'll pass over to him.
Great. Thank you ever so much for that, Mark. I'm going to share my screen. So you should all be able to see my screen now. So my name is Ben Cook. I'm a senior product specialist at Management Studio. I'm going to try and reinforce what Mark's been saying by showing you in a bit more detail what Management Studio can do. There's a huge amount that it helps with in terms of M&A activities. So I'm just going to touch on the key points, and hopefully that'll give you some understanding of what's capable, but there is plenty more going on as well. So let's start out with this slide here. Let's just go in to that view there. Great stuff. So in terms of the overview, there are four main steps I'd like to talk through today. It's the discovery, consolidation, optimization, and the deploy. But just before I get stuck in, so where we're starting out is we've got a number of organizations that are merging. We've got separate infrastructure in all of those organizations. And the end point, the end goal really is to be in a place where we're managing a single set of infrastructure, a single set of applications. And it's how do we get to that place? And it is quite fiddly. Let's start out with a discovery piece. So in terms of discovery, what do? Well, we need to understand what's out there. There's lots of disparate infrastructure going on. We want this all to be in one place where everyone can manage it in that kind of single pane of glass view. And ideally, we want to avoid using spreadsheets. How does that actually work? So we end up by basically putting in a centralized Management Studio instance, which can be anywhere you like. It can be in the cloud, it can be on-prem. And then we have data feeds coming into that. So we have a thing called the Remote Agent Toolkit, which doesn't require an installation, but will be run on the remote sites. So the organizations which are merging would run the Remote Agent Toolkit. And it's quite a clever bit of technology because that can then trigger what are called connectors. And connectors can go out into on-prem systems like Active Directory and SCCM and other inventory systems and bring in data and then feed that into that centralized Management Studio instance. And what typically happens is the Remote Agent Toolkit will be running on a number of those kind of satellite sites feeding in. But that's not all. As Mark said, there are other data sources out there. So there might be HR data, which we can only get in Excel or CSV format. Those can be automatically ingested. And if there are cloud services in use like Entra and Intune, which there very often are these days, those will definitely need to come in as well into that same instance. And then finally, again, Mark talked about surveys to fill those gaps. There are generally parts of the organization where we don't have good data, or sometimes we just need to ask people about things. Do you use these applications? Surveys are really, really useful. Management Studio provides the surveys. They're hosted on our web portal, so users get an email, they click the link, fill in the survey, and all that data automatically comes in, which gives this centralized set of data where we can start making decisions, start understanding what's going on. Before we can do much more, though, we need to think about consolidating. One of the big pieces is applications. And in terms of consolidation, there's a couple of things we need to consider. One is the naming of applications. As if you've worked with apps, you'll know that different vendors use different standards. And across all of those different estates, we're going to have lots of different naming standards. So we need to consolidate all of that. We've got a bit of technology called ACE, which is the Asset Confidence Engine. The AI is on the end there because it does use AI to help with some of that cleansing. And that provides auto normalization. That's cleaning up those names. And I'll show you this in a moment. But it basically results in a consistent set of naming across all of those apps, across all of those different organizations. And it really is required to be able to make decisions around how to move forward with applications. So let me show you how that works now. I'm just going to jump into the demonstration. So this is the Management Studio system I've got running here. Before we jump into the app naming consolidation, just a mini overview of what we're looking at. So first of all, you can probably tell we've got a dashboard here. The blue buttons on the left here are my main modules. So when we're bringing in all that data, we bring in things like the applications, the users, the devices, and that's where you would look at these things. So if we wanted to look at, say, an individual user, I'm just going to open up my user record here. You can see this is me, there's AD data, some HR data in here, things like departmental data, and things like the applications which I require. But what I want to talk about really is application normalization. So how does that work? So I'm going to come into my applications now, and we have a couple of different views actually in here. There's the accepted applications are what we see by default. These are the applications that have already been nominated as in scope. But what happens at the beginning of a project is all the applications will be in this area called pending. And this is almost like a triage area where we need to make decisions. And if I were to search for just the Adobe applications in here, and if you take a look at the vendor column, you can see this is the typical sort of variation you'd see when you're looking at all those apps coming in from all those different areas. And to clean those up, normally we have ACE running in the background as a daily task or maybe an hourly task, but I can do it manually. So I can come in here and I come into the ACE normalization area, and that will show me the suggested changes, and they're in yellow here. So where we've got an Adobe Inc., it goes to Adobe. Systems Incorporated goes to Adobe, and so on. And if I want to approve these, I just tell it which ones I want to approve. That's all of them. And then click approve and then apply those approvals. So that will go through, change those names. Now, normally we would also be doing the versions as well, because quite often versions will have letters in them or patches or, things that we can't use as numbers to compare, are they the highest or not. So we would normally do the vendor, the name and the version, but just for this demo, I'm just doing the vendor. And I need to hit refresh, and we'll see that those Adobes are all nice and consistent now. The next piece is thinking about versions. So we've got a nice clean set of naming standards, but we're going to want to reduce the number of versions we've got. And also we might want to be replacing certain applications with other ones. Like Mark was saying, we have a strategy on PDF. What software do we want to use for editing PDFs? So this is about taking multiple applications and collapsing them down to a smaller number. And again, ACE AI is going to help us here. It does that by making suggestions. So we harvest decisions made by other customers around applications. So where customers say an application is in scope, we take a record of that, and we provide confidence ratings based on how many people make those decisions. And we present that to you in the user interface to help you make fast, informed decisions about which applications should be in scope, which should be rationalized, which should be rejected, and so on. Because really what you want to get to is a place where you understand which applications you need across all of those different organizations that are being merged. That's the end goal here, to reduce the amount of apps you're managing, to reduce effort, to reduce licensing costs, maintenance costs, and so on. So it's all, we need to do all this stuff, and this is making it a lot easier. Let me show you how it works. Another very simple example. So same set of Adobe apps, also in pending. This time I can just go straight into the rationalization area rather than the normalization area. And why don't I just sort by name here? And I'm just going to pick out these apps here. So that block of apps I've just selected here, they're my Adobe readers. And you can see we've got various versions from 18 up to 22.1. Now you'll notice all but one of them are recommended for rationalization. The confidence rating is 95%, and it's basically saying rationalize them all to version 22.1, which is my highest version. Now there are various settings in here which tell it whether to roll up to the latest major version or to the latest version overall. It depends what the project is aiming for in the licensing and so on. But for this example, I just want to rationalize those apps to this bottom app here, this version 22.1. So I've selected them. I just quick approve, same as before. They turn green and I apply them. Now, the interesting thing here is, and I haven't really talked about this, but if I come back to my previous screen and we have a look at those, you'll see for each of those readers, these ones down here, there's a number. And that number is the number of people that use that application. Now, because we're rationalizing all of them down to a single record, which is this highest version here, what the system does is it takes all of the users from the previous versions and forward paths them to this latest version. And then it marks that latest one as accepted. So this latest one here with 1,764 people will now, once I refresh it, have all of the people from all of the earlier versions. So we know when we deliver systems, we know who needs Adobe Reader 22.1 or whatever the software title is. So I'm going to turn on my accepted apps now, otherwise I won't see that one. And let's turn on that. And here you go. So it's refreshed my grid. Here are my apps I've just rationalized. You can see the top ones have been rationalized. They've all got 0 users because they're forward pathed, and now I've got 3002 on that latest version of Reader. And this is the process we go through with all our applications, considering licensing and so on, to get us in a place where we know exactly which applications are required by whom across all of those different organizations that are being merged. It's really, really powerful. I used to be an apps packager. I've done this stuff, and I know that ACE saves a huge amount of time and effort. Okay, let's move on to the next piece, which is the optimization. So this is about optimizing us getting to the place we want to be in. There's a couple of reports I'll show you. One of them is the projection report. And if I come back into the solution now, with the projection report, what we're doing is we're saying, who do you want to get ready early on as possible? So it's a who kind of report. It's a user-based report. So we go into the user migrations here. And I've got about 5,000 people who are being merged into this one organization, but I just want a subset of that just to make the numbers a bit smaller and everything runs a bit more quickly. So I'm going to just pick EMEA, which is, I think, about 800 people. So the projection report we run from this button here, and I just hit that, and I'm just going to minimize that window. And now I hit the run button here. And what that's doing is it's working out which are the very best apps to get ready each week to get the most number of people ready. The default rates are, we assume we can do 25 apps per week, and we're looking ahead by 4 weeks. Actually, I can run the next wave. So we go 8 weeks ahead. That gives us 8 weeks forecast. The green line is the important one. That's the number of people who are ready at the end of each week. This is week 1. At the moment, we've got 1 person projected ready. After we've done 25 apps, we've got 25 people ready. After we've done 50 apps, we've got 206 people. And by the time we've done 75 apps, we've jumped up to 412. Now, if you remember, it was about 800 people in EMEA, so that's about half the number. And actually, that's where the orange and the green cross over. That's where we're at the kind of the halfway point in terms of half the people ready. So this is telling us which apps to do each week. So if I click back on week 1 here, so this is the end of week 1, August the 5th, come to my applications here. If I want to see the apps for that week, that point in time, I change it to point, and now I've got a set of 25 apps that I need to focus on. And again, this is the app list for week 2 if I click on week 2, and so on. So it's giving you a work plan, so we know where we need to go. Now, there's no way that any apps team is going to be able to consistently deliver exactly 25 apps per week. Maybe they're doing 38 some weeks, 20 some weeks. It's going to vary a bit. So what we need is a way, when we're progressing through this, of measuring real-time readiness. And that's what the readiness reports are about. The projection is about forecasting and making a plan. The readiness is about, where are we today? Who can we migrate today? So you can run it in a few different ways. I'm just going to run it as, let's see, there's a split report where I can run the readiness in the top, and then I can show you their apps beneath, which is quite nice. So up here is a RAG report. So I'm going to choose my RAG report, which is that one. And in the bottom, I just want a list of the apps. So this is showing me individual users. I can see actually somebody's ready here, Anne Martin. And in the bottom half, I get to see their apps. So Anne has 2 apps that she needs. This one's been cancelled, but you can see the 2 apps that she needs are both in live. So they are both ready. So she's good to go. Whereas, let's have a look. Clarence here, the apps they need are, there's 15 of them, only 3 are ready. So they're 20% ready. And we can run these reports by location, by department. So we could do a departmental readiness. So we could see, say, which department is the most ready. And this is going to allow us to get some real-time statistics on, which department should we be looking at migrating first based on the progress of the apps team. Really, really powerful report. And lots of options around things like, what if, you can say, what if these 3 apps were ready? How would that impact my readiness? But I don't have time to go through all of those now. So that's projection report is your best way forward. Readiness report is where we are today. And that allows us to use things called deployment units, which Mark mentioned, which is where we're taking tranches of people and kind of getting them ready and migrated. We've also got application acceptance testing. That's something that Management Studio supports. So when apps are being prepared, they can be tested by end users, and that's all managed by Management Studio again. And really, we're just providing that quick path, that rapid way of getting to our optimized single infrastructure. Again, saving time and money. And the final piece, I'm just checking time, I think we're okay, is deployment. So we've got a number of pieces to help with the deployment, things like user self-scheduling. We can automatically deploy people. So if people choose a particular deployment date, on that point in time or at that point in time, we can add them to groups or add their machine to groups so that they automatically receive the upgrade or the new applications or whatever it is we need to deliver to them. We've also got an engineers portal. It's a web-based portal. So if you do have engineers involved in handing over new hardware or doing something with the migration, this web portal is something that we can provide, and it's a really nice way of just delegating control to those engineers. And finally, as Mark mentioned, we've got lots of nice web dashboards and dashboards built into the solution itself so that you can keep an eye on progress. Stakeholders can get an understanding of what's going on. So I've talked quite quickly. Hopefully I've not thrown too much information at you, but that is my summary of how we can help with mergers and acquisitions. And I'm going to pass back to you now, Mark. I think you're on mute, Mark.
And let me take myself off mute. Perfect. Yeah, thanks, Ben. All right, so yeah, there's my screen back up. So yeah, thanks, Ben, for covering all of that off in detail. Yeah, hopefully between myself and Ben, we've talked through the whys, the hows, and then Ben's been able to show you kind of really how this actually comes together in reality. I've been keeping an eye on things, so we've had no questions popping up on throughout the webinar. But if there are any, please feel free to reach out to myself or Ben directly once the webinar's done. I hope you found this session useful. If it sounds like this might be a benefit to some M&A activities you're looking at, or really just to understand your own estate, please feel free to get in touch and we can coordinate looking at a free assessment to show you the tool or to maybe get some activities kicked off for you. Following on from today, I will be sharing out a recording and a summary of the session. Once again, any questions, because we've whizzed through stuff, please don't hesitate to get in touch. And then finally, we will be doing another session in exactly 2 weeks. And in that one, what we're going to be doing is just deep diving into how this tool could be used, specifically when you're looking at some infrastructure transformation activities like moving from SCCM to Intune, Citrix to AVDs, Active Directory to Entra. So lots more that we can touch on in that one. But for now, thank you everyone for your time today. And what I'll do now is I'll close the webinar. And yeah, thank you everyone very much for joining. Boom.